A gun was pointed directly at my daughter's face. I heard someone shout, "Freeze!" And in that instant, my entire body went cold. The person holding the weapon wasn't a robber or some criminal. It was our own HOA security guard from the neighborhood we lived in. And why? Because my daughter looked suspicious coming home at 10 p.m. What this man didn't know was that my daughter is an FBI tactical commander who's led some of the most dangerous raids in the country over the last 5 years. And from that moment on, everything spiraled. Where are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below and stay with me as I tell you how a power-drunk HOA guard made the mistake of a lifetime when he crossed the wrong family. My name is Michael Johnson, a 58-year-old retired diplomatic officer who spent 30 years working in high-stakes foreign affairs. I thought I'd seen it all, until I moved into Lakeside Pines, an upscale gated community in Connecticut that promised peace, luxury, and security. But what the brochures didn't mention was the iron-fisted HOA, which operated more like a private regime. After losing my wife 5 years ago and returning home from years abroad, I just wanted quiet. Lakeside Pines, with its sparkling lake and manicured lawns, felt like the right place to heal. I had no idea that tight security would turn into a nightmare. My daughter, Amy, 26, took a different path than mine, graduated top of her class at Quantico, rose fast through the FBI, and became a tactical commander handling high-risk ops and financial crimes. I barely get to see her due to her work, so when she called saying she'd be home for a few weeks of R&R after a 2-year counterterrorism assignment overseas, I was overjoyed. We'd only lived in Lakeside Pines for 3 months, and I couldn't wait to show her the new home. The HOA here is run by Robert Thompson, another 58-year-old, a retired corporate exec with a power complex and a trophy wife, Sarah, who acts like she owns the neighborhood. From day one, I clashed with their ridiculous rules. Everything from the approved shade of white for window blinds to which day you could water your lawn. The real enforcer of all this nonsense? Curtis Wilson, a 42-year-old ex-cop booted off the force for excessive force. Now, the head of HOA security. He struts around like a warlord, backed by a crew of equally unqualified guards. The night it happened, it was a Friday in July. Amy's flight got delayed, and she reached Lakeside Pines around 10 p.m. I had given her the gate code and a key, but I'd forgotten to notify security, an honest mistake, one that should have been easily resolved. As I waited for her inside, I heard loud voices. I opened the door and froze. Curtis had a gun drawn, aimed straight at my daughter's face. His partner Jason stood nearby, hand on his holster. "I don't care what ID you're showing me. You don't have clearance." Curtis barked, "Get on the ground, or I'll consider you a threat." Amy stood calm, her hands visible, her posture steady, the kind of calm only years of real danger could teach. She'd already sized up the weapon, a Glock 19, and she knew immediately he likely didn't have proper licensing for it. "Curtis, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled, stepping out. "That's my daughter." I tried to move toward her, but Amy shifted slightly, subtly keeping me out of harm's way. Curtis didn't lower the gun right away. He was drunk on the power. "She should have checked in," he said, eventually lowering the weapon with a sneer. "No exceptions, even for FBI agents, if that's even true." Amy stayed quiet, studying him. Only after the weapon was down did she speak, voice sharp and clear. "Mr. Wilson, pointing a firearm at a federal officer without cause is a felony. And I'm pretty sure you're not licensed to carry that gun as private security in this state." I watched the color drain from Curtis's face. He tried to recover with a weak excuse. "This is private property. Rules are different." But he was clearly shaken. "I'll report this to Mr. Thompson. Expect a board hearing." As they walked off, I saw Jason lean in, whispering he was nervous. Inside, I closed the door and tried to calm down. My hands were trembling. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I told Amy. "That was beyond unacceptable." She set down her bag and gave me a steady hug. "It's okay, Dad. I've seen worse. But we need a long-term plan. That man's dangerous. Not because he's skilled, but because he's insecure and armed. That's always a bad mix." We stayed up late in the kitchen, sipping tea that went cold. Amy asked precise questions about the HOA, Curtis, and how things worked around here. I could see her mind already turning. You know, she said, eyes focused. Sometimes the most interesting cases aren't the big terrorist rings or bank heists. Sometimes it's a small town. If this story touched you, go ahead and subscribe. Some truths are too important to miss. Tyrants abusing their little kingdoms often need the most attention, Amy had said with a wry smile, and I laughed, relieved to have my capable daughter home, completely unaware of just how prophetic her words would turn out to be. The very next morning, right on cue, came a knock on our door. Standing there was Robert Thompson, pressed khakis, a Lakeside Pines polo shirt, silver hair immaculately styled, and an expression carefully arranged to look concerned but failing to mask his obvious disdain. Beside him was his wife, Sarah, dressed more for a country club brunch than for what was clearly a confrontation. Robert held a formal warning letter in his manicured hand. "Mr. Johnson," he began, not bothering to wait for an invitation inside, "we need to discuss last night's unfortunate incident." His tone oozed that artificial warmth you only hear from men who've taken too many executive leadership seminars. Unfortunate incident, I echoed, my years of diplomatic discipline at war with the raw anger of a father. Your security guard aimed a loaded gun at my daughter's face for the crime of returning home after dark. That's not unfortunate. It's reckless and illegal. Robert's plastic smile didn't budge, though his eyes lost all pretense of politeness. Our security team was following protocol. Had you properly registered your guest, my daughter, I interrupted, a rare breach of my diplomatic restraint, is not a guest. She's my family. This is her home. And no protocol justifies drawing a weapon on an unarmed woman who is showing identification. Amy appeared beside me, casually dressed, but radiating that ever-alert presence she always carried. She gently placed a hand on my arm and then turned to Robert. "Mr. Thompson," she said, calm and composed, "I understand the importance of protocol, but I have some concerns about your team's licensing status. Based on what I saw last night, I'm not convinced all of your guards are legally permitted to carry firearms in this state." Her voice was courteous, even friendly, but I could hear the subtle edge of interrogation woven into every word. For the briefest moment, Robert's polished smile faltered before he pulled it back together. "All of our staff meet the highest standards, Miss Johnson. Now, if you'll kindly accept this formal warning, we can consider the matter resolved." He extended the envelope, but neither Amy nor I moved to take it. "I don't think we'll be accepting that," Amy replied, still smiling. "But I appreciate the visit." She gently closed the door, leaving Robert and Sarah stunned and motionless on our front porch. Through the window, I saw them retreat down the walkway, Sarah already gesturing wildly, no doubt spinning the story into neighborhood gossip gold. That felt good, I admitted, but probably not strategic. Amy smirked, a glint of steel in her eyes. "Oh, I disagree. Sometimes you need to establish firm boundaries before beginning negotiations. And make no mistake, Dad, we're already in negotiations, whether they realize it or not." That afternoon, we met Linda Peterson, a 65-year-old retired teacher who lived 3 doors down. She brought over a late welcome pie and explained she'd been out visiting her grandchildren. As we chatted on the patio, it became clear that Linda was part of a silent faction in Lakeside Pines. Residents fed up with the Thompsons, but too intimidated or powerless to fight back. "Robert and Sarah have run this place like their private fiefdom for years," she told us. "Anyone who speaks up gets slapped with violation notices or shut out of community events. Most people just pay the ridiculous fines and stay quiet." Amy listened carefully, asking casual questions that were anything but, her sharp mind already piecing together the social and legal structure of the community. Over the next few days, she immersed herself in the HOA bylaws, flagging several clauses that wouldn't stand up to legal scrutiny. Meanwhile, Curtis Wilson, the same guard who pointed a gun at her, began parking his security vehicle right across from our home, lingering for hours. It was an obvious attempt to intimidate us, though likely ineffective against someone who's faced actual terrorists. I noticed other things too. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact, and Linda later told me that Sarah had hosted a ladies' tea and made a point not to invite me, the lone single father in the area. Amy, undeterred, spent long hours on her laptop, making hush calls from behind closed doors. When I asked what she was working on, she showed me something disturbing. Curtis had been fired from the police force for repeated excessive force incidents. Worse, Robert Thompson had personally pushed to get him hired by Lakeside Pines, despite his red flags. Even more concerning, the security company supposedly contracted by the HOA was paying Curtis far above the industry norm. "Something's off with the finances," Amy muttered, scrolling through public records. "The HOA fees here are among the highest in the state, but the services don't add up." Tensions escalated when Amy ran into Sarah at the local grocery store. I wasn't there, but Amy described the encounter. Sarah deliberately bumped her cart into Amy's, then loudly said, "Oh, it's the FBI agent. I hope you're not investigating our little grocery store. We're all law-abiding here, except those who don't follow the rules." Amy, ever unflappable, smiled and replied, "Actually, financial crimes are one of my specialties. It's fascinating what people think they can hide in plain sight." Sarah turned pale and quickly fled, unaware that another woman, a sharp-looking professional in a pantsuit, had witnessed the exchange. That woman turned out to be Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old attorney on the HOA board who, as it turned out, had grown increasingly uneasy with Robert's authoritarian grip. She introduced herself to Amy in the parking lot, and that's when the real story began. She had confided in Jessica, suggesting they meet for coffee, and shared a quiet but firm warning. "There are things happening in Lakeside Pines that don't add up." Jessica had pointed out financial discrepancies, suspicious contracts, and selective enforcement of community rules. "Some of us have been gathering evidence," she told Amy, "but we need someone who knows how to use it effectively." That evening, as Amy recounted the conversation to me, I saw that familiar spark in her eyes, the same one I'd seen since she was a kid, the look that showed up whenever she smelled a mystery worth solving. "Sometimes, Dad," she said with quiet calculation, "you have to let your enemies think they're winning before you flip the whole board." 1 week later, the annual HOA meeting offered the perfect stage to watch the Thompson clique in action. The community center felt less like a forum and more like a fiefdom. Robert and Sarah perched at the head table like royalty, flanked by Curtis and David Clark, the HOA treasurer who nodded along with everything Robert said like a bobblehead. We were deliberately seated in the back row, an obvious power play that only made me chuckle, especially when I realized it gave Amy the perfect view of the room. In the days leading up to the meeting, she'd quietly built trust with several residents, folks like Jessica, who had grown disillusioned with the HOA's leadership, and she'd also reconnected with an old friend from her FBI Academy days, Officer James Rodriguez, now serving in the local police department. The meeting began with the usual self-congratulations, Robert boasting about rising property values, Sarah promoting events we likely wouldn't be invited to, and David presenting a vague financial report that could have been about any random nonprofit. When they opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. My diplomatic years had trained me well. I noticed that security expenses have increased 30% over the past year. I began. "But there's no itemized breakdown. Could you provide some clarity?" The room went still. Apparently, transparency wasn't on the agenda. Robert's smile stiffened. "Security is our top priority at Lakeside Pines, Mr. Johnson. The board has reviewed and approved all expenses." I pressed, still polite but firm. "We're residents paying these fees. Don't we deserve to know where that money is going?" David fidgeted while Robert's face darkened. "Detailed financials are restricted to board members for security reasons." He tried to move on, but Jessica raised her voice. "Actually, I'm on the board, and I've never seen those itemized reports either." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Robert shot Jessica a glare of pure venom. Curtis subtly stepped forward, stationing himself near me in a clear intimidation tactic. The mood in the room thickened. Robert rushed through the remaining items and abruptly adjourned the meeting. As people began to disperse, Sarah made a beeline for Jessica, engaging her in what looked like a heated exchange near the snack table, while Curtis and another guard loomed near the exit, watching us with poorly concealed hostility. "Let them make the next move," Amy whispered as we headed to the car. "They're rattled. That's when people make mistakes." Sure enough, as we tried to exit the parking lot, a security vehicle pulled in front of us, blocking our way. Curtis strutted over my window, smug. "Sir, your car violates HOA parking rules. The angle exceeds the 15 degrees limit from a curb." The pettiness almost made me laugh. But Amy calmly put a hand on my arm. "Officer Wilson," she said smoothly, "you're mistaken. And more importantly, you're obstructing a vehicle's exit, which is a violation." Then she dialed a number without breaking eye contact. "Officer Rodriguez, this is Amy Johnson. I'm at the Lakeside Pines Community Center. We're being blocked in by HOA security and falsely accused of a violation. Could you send someone over?" Curtis's face drained of color. He immediately signaled for the other guard to move the vehicle. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Robert and Sarah stood on the steps, watching us leave, their faces a blend of frustration and, for the first time, doubt. "That won't make us many friends," I said as we turned onto our street. Amy just smiled, eyes forward. "We don't need friends, Dad. We need respect. And sometimes, you earn respect by showing people what strength looks like." Once home, she laid everything out. "Curtis isn't just a jerk with a badge," she said. "He's part of something bigger." Jessica and I dug into the HOA finances. There's serious corruption. For one, the security company Curtis supposedly works for, it's owned by Robert's brother-in-law. They're billing premium prices for garbage service. She handed me a folder thick with reports covering 5 years. And that's just the tip of it. There's over $300,000 missing. Money supposedly used for infrastructure projects that don't exist. I flipped through the files. The patterns jumped out. "This smells like embezzlement," I said, both impressed and disturbed. "But why risk it for what's not even a massive amount? Robert doesn't strike me as desperate for cash." Amy's smile was cold. "It's rarely about need, Dad. It's about greed and the belief that no one's paying attention." Jessica had reached out, suggesting a casual coffee meeting, but her words had a weight that lingered. There are things happening in Lakeside Pines that don't add up. She had talked about financial discrepancies, shady contracts, and the selective enforcement of rules. Some residents, she said, had quietly started gathering evidence, but they needed someone who knew how to use it. That evening, when Amy shared this with me, her eyes sparkled with that old familiar gleam, the same one she had as a kid when she stumbled upon a mystery worth solving. "Sometimes, Dad," she mused, "you have to let your enemies think they're winning before you flip the board." A week later, the annual HOA meeting gave us a front row seat, or rather, a back row one, to watch the Thompson regime in action. The setup screamed control. Robert and Sarah seated like royalty at the head table, Curtis looming beside them, and David Clark, the 45-year-old treasurer, nodding eagerly to every word Robert uttered. Our seats had been deliberately placed in the back, clearly an attempt to sideline us, but played right into Amy's hands. She had spent the week building quiet alliances with residents who, like Jessica, resented the status quo, and she had reconnected with Officer James Rodriguez, an old FBI colleague now with the local police. As expected, the meeting kicked off with Robert's self-congratulatory speech on property values, Sarah's announcements about exclusive events we clearly weren't invited to, and David's laughably vague financial report. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand, drawing on years of diplomatic budgeting. I asked about a 30% increase in security spending with no itemized breakdown. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Robert's face tightened. "Security is our top priority," he said with forced calm. I pushed gently, reminding them that as paying residents, we had a right to know where our money was going. David fidgeted. Robert's irritation became visible. "Detailed financials are for board members only," he snapped. But then Jessica, seated nearby, spoke up. "Actually, I'm on the board, and I haven't seen any itemized security expenses either." A murmur spread across the room. Robert glared at her like she'd betrayed a secret. Curtis shifted forward, clearly trying to intimidate me. Robert hurriedly ended the meeting. As people drifted toward the refreshments, Sarah cornered Jessica in a tense exchange, while Curtis and another guard flanked the exit, watching us. "Let them make the next move," Amy whispered as we headed to our car. They're rattled. They'll slip. Sure enough, as we pulled out, a security vehicle blocked our exit. Curtis strolled up, smug as ever. Sir, your car violates HOA parking regs. The angle's off. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but Amy calmly rested a hand on my arm. Officer Wilson, she said steady and cold, you're impeding our exit, which is a traffic violation. She dialed her phone, eyes never leaving his face. Officer Rodriguez? This is Amy Johnson. We have an issue at the community center. Security is blocking our vehicle with false claims. Can you send someone? Instantly, Curtis's face went pale. He backed off, muttering something about a misunderstanding, and waved his guide to move the vehicle. As we drove off, I glanced back. Robert and Sarah stood on the steps, angry, and, for the first time, unsure. That won't earn us any fans, I muttered. Amy replied quietly, we don't need love, Dad. We need respect. And sometimes, that comes only after you show strength. Back home, Amy opened up more. Curtis, she said, wasn't just a hothead ex-cop. He was part of something deeper. She and Jessica had found that the security company employing him was owned by Robert's brother-in-law, charging inflated rates for poor service. She laid out 5 years' worth of financial reports. That's just the start, she said. Over $300,000 had vanished, supposedly spent on infrastructure that no one could identify. I flipped through the data, and my diplomatic instincts told me what I was seeing: classic embezzlement. Why risk this for such sums? I asked. Amy's answer was grim. It's not about need, it's entitlement. Robert and Sarah think the rules don't apply to them. The money is just a bonus to the power. She tapped another sheet. Property records showing Robert secretly owned 3 homes in the community, all under shell companies, all mysteriously never cited for violations. Then Amy's phone buzzed. Jessica had texted, emergency board meeting tomorrow. R is pushing new bylaw amendments. Need to talk. Amy's face hardened. They're speeding things up. So must we. She picked up her phone and called someone. Marcus, it's Amy. Need a financial consult. Civilian. Urgent. Can you be in Connecticut tomorrow? She hung up and looked at me. Marcus Reed, top financial crimes guy at the Bureau. Between cases. Owes me a favor. I raised an eyebrow. Amy, this is a neighborhood fight, not a federal case. Her reply was steady. Dad, when people in power steal and intimidate, that's exactly when it becomes a case. And nobody points a gun at me and walks away. Predictably, retaliation came fast. The next morning, 5 bogus violation notices showed up: trash can position, porch light color, flag illumination. The petty harassment kept coming. Curtis or one of his goons parked outside, photographing our house. When I went to swim at the pool, I was told my access was suspended due to pending violations. Neighbors we used to chat with now crossed the street. Classic intimidation, Amy said, flipping through more violation mail. They want us to fold or move. Too bad they picked the wrong house. Instead of fear, I felt more resolute. I'd faced warlords. Robert Thompson? He was laughable. Marcus arrived, sharp, calm, methodical. He combed through the records, shaking his head at the glaring red flags. If this holds, he said, you've got fraud, self-dealing, misuse of funds. The security contract alone is textbook corruption. Meanwhile, Amy had installed subtle cameras around the property. Just collecting evidence, she explained. That decision paid off 3 nights later. Footage showed Curtis and 2 guards sneaking into our yard at 3 a.m., measuring our lawn with flashlights, snapping photos. It escalated again when Linda Peterson came to us in tears. Sarah had threatened to ban her grandkids if she kept talking to us. I'm so sorry, Linda sobbed, but they're all I have. Amy was gentle. You don't need to apologize. People like the Thompsons manipulate what we love. But their time's almost up. That night, we noticed strange activity at the Thompsons' place. David Clark arrived with folders. Curtis followed. They stayed for hours, arguing in the lit-up kitchen. They're trying to cover tracks, Amy whispered. She typed a message, then turned to me, resolved. Time for the next phase. The next morning, Curtis showed up with 2 guards. Mandatory inspection. He barked, trying to force his way inside. I blocked the door. Amy stood behind me, calm and ready. It wasn't just about need, Dad. It was about entitlement. People like Robert and Sarah truly believe the rules don't apply to them. The money is almost secondary. It's the power trip they're addicted to. Amy tapped another document on the table, this one revealing property records. Did you know Robert owns 3 investment properties in this community through shell companies? She asked. And somehow, those homes never get violation notices, even when the infractions are obvious. As we discussed our options, her phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow. Or is pushing new bylaw amendments. Need to talk. Amy showed it to me, her face suddenly resolute. They're accelerating their timeline, she said, which means we need to accelerate ours. I think it's time to bring in professional help. Without hesitation, she made a call, her tone shifting into the crisp, controlled cadence I knew from her time in the bureau. Marcus, it's Amy. I need to consult on a financial analysis, civilian matter, but time-sensitive. Can you come to Connecticut tomorrow? Perfect. I'll send the address. When she hung up, she turned to me. Special Agent Marcus Reed, top financial crimes specialist with the FBI. He's between cases and he owes me one. With his help, we can confirm what I'm seeing in these records and build something real. I raised an eyebrow. A case? Amy, this is a neighborhood dispute, not a federal crime scene. But her expression didn't budge. Dad, she said, when people in power abuse that power and possibly commit financial crimes in the process, that's exactly what warrants a proper investigation. And besides, her smile was sharp. Nobody points a gun at me and gets away with it. Predictably, the Thompsons struck back fast. The next morning, we received 5 different HOA violation notices, each more absurd than the last. Our trash bin was supposedly 2 inches out of position. The porch light was labeled too warm-toned. The American flag, I'd hung, improperly lit after sunset. That week, the harassment didn't let up. Curtis or one of his guards loitered outside our house for hours, snapping photos of anything they could twist into an infraction. When I tried to use the community pool, I was told my membership was suspended pending review. Friendly neighbors suddenly avoided eye contact, clearly warned off from associating with the Johnsons. Through it all, Amy stayed calm, even a little amused. Classic intimidation tactics, she said as we sifted through the day's mail. 2 more violation notices. They're trying to make us so uncomfortable we either cave or leave. But they badly misjudged us. If anything, their antics only deepened my resolve. I negotiated with warlords and dictators. Robert Thompson's suburban games were laughably small in comparison. Marcus Reed arrived exactly when he said he would. A no-nonsense man in his 40s, he had the sharp eye of an investigator and the precision of an accountant. For 2 full days, he combed through the HOA records Jessica had gathered, occasionally shaking his head or whistling at the boldness of the financial manipulation. If these are accurate, he told us one evening at the dining table, you're looking at multiple violations, some serious. That security contract alone is textbook self-dealing. And these infrastructure improvements with no actual work done? That smells like embezzlement. Meanwhile, Amy had been busy installing discreet, high-end security cameras around the property. When I raised an eyebrow at the sophistication, she just said, we need to document everything. You don't build a case without evidence. And sure enough, her planning paid off. 3 days after the HOA meeting, the cameras recorded Curtis and 2 other guards sneaking into our yard at 3 a.m., shining flashlights, measuring our grass, taking photos like a covert operation. Things escalated further when Linda Peterson came to our door in tears. Sarah Thompson had cornered her at the community center, threatening to ban her grandchildren from visiting if she didn't end her friendship with us. I'm so sorry, Linda sobbed, but they're all I have since my husband passed. I can't lose them. Amy, to her credit, met her with warmth and strength. You have nothing to be sorry for, Linda, she said gently. People like the Thompsons feed on fear and control. But I promise you, their time is running out. That night, we spotted strange activity at the Thompsons' house. David Clark showed up after dark carrying files. 30 minutes later, Curtis joined them. Through the window, We could see all three gesturing wildly during a tense 2-hour meeting. Amy observed quietly from the shadows of our living room. "They're panicking," she whispered. Jessica's questions rattled them. Now they're scrambling to cover their tracks. She fired off a few texts, then looked at me with steady determination. Time to move to the next phase. And then came the confrontation Curtis had clearly been preparing for. The next morning, he showed up on our porch with 2 other guards, all of them stone-faced. "Mandatory security inspection," he declared and tried to force his way inside. I stepped forward and blocked the doorway. Feeling a surge of anger I rarely let myself show, I looked Curtis dead in the eye and said firmly, "You have no authority to enter my home without permission or a warrant." He smirked and smugly held up a paper. HOA Bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 3. Security personnel may conduct inspections of any property upon reasonable suspicion of bylaw violations. "We've documented 27 violations just this past week," he said with barely concealed arrogance. Amy stepped beside me, her phone visibly recording. "That clause directly contradicts state law regarding private property rights," she replied calmly. "And since we're talking documentation, maybe you'd like to explain what you were doing in our yard at 3 a.m. 2 nights ago." For a brief second, his face flickered with unease before twisting into open hostility. "You're interfering with HOA security operations. There will be consequences," he snapped before backing off. As they retreated, I noticed one of the guards glance back nervously, clearly unsettled by how far things were going. That night, our security cameras caught Curtis and that same nervous guard returning after midnight. But this time, it wasn't just harassment. They crossed the line. They tore up our garden, yanked out plants, and spray-painted an obscene message across our fence. The next morning, when I saw the footage, I was ready to storm over and confront him on the spot. But Amy laid a firm hand on my arm, steady and deliberate. "This is exactly what we need," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes alight with fire. "They're desperate now. They're making mistakes, and every one of them only strengthens our case." Then she picked up her phone and made a quiet, clipped call in the tone I'd heard so often in her FBI days. "It's time," she said. "We need support for the next phase." When she hung up, she turned to me with a smile that was pure steel. "Dad, remember how you always told me timing is everything in diplomacy? Well, I think it's time these neighborhood tyrants learned what happens when they mistake patience for weakness." That weekend, something incredible happened. A group of neighbors gathered on our lawn, tools in hand, ready to help rebuild our garden. Jessica Miller had quietly rallied them, people who had suffered similar harassment but had been too afraid to speak up until now. As they worked, the stories flowed of selective rule enforcement, absurd fines, and Sarah's cold social punishments for anyone who dared question Robert. What began as fixing a garden quickly became something more, a community reclaiming its voice. Among the volunteers was Marcus Reed, quietly introduced as Amy's colleague, never mentioning the FBI. His presence came in handy when Curtis cruised by slowly, glaring, clearly documenting who stood with us. "That him?" Marcus asked, eyes narrowing as he spotted the bulge beneath Curtis's jacket. Amy nodded, and Marcus slipped away to make a phone call. 20 minutes later, Officer James Rodriguez just happened to stop by in his patrol car, and Curtis vanished like smoke. Inside, away from prying ears, James sat us down. "Amy, Curtis Wilson's record is a mess. Multiple excessive force complaints. 2 sketchy shootings, both ruled justified under suspicious circumstances. There's even a domestic call that disappeared from the file." He was nudged out of the force quietly, given a neutral reference. Then he added, almost in disbelief, "And the concealed weapon permit he flashed? Expired last year. He's not legally armed." While the community efforts outside symbolized hope, the real strategy was unfolding inside our home. Amy, Marcus, Jessica, and James worked in sync, building a case. Cross-referencing HOA record Jessica had quietly collected over months with police reports and financial data. Marcus mapped out how Robert funneled money through shell companies tied to his inner circle, landscaping, roadwork, security, all awarded inflated contracts and doing the bare minimum. One diagram on our dining table told the whole story. A security firm supposedly employing Curtis, registered as Sarah's brother, no physical office, no other clients, over $150,000 a year in fees, but tax records show only $60,000 in wages. The rest? Gone. Offshore. Jessica pointed out more patterns, like how some properties, owned through shady LLCs traced back to Robert, were never cited for violations, even when they clearly broke rules. It's systemic, she said, and it's deliberate. That night, after everyone left and the house grew quiet, Linda stayed behind. I've been thinking, Amy, she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. They can't actually ban my grandkids from visiting. That's not even in the bylaws. I've let fear control me, but I'm done with that. Amy smiled, warm and proud. That's exactly it, Linda. Their power only works because people believe in it. She didn't have to say the rest. We all felt it in the air. That belief, the one the Thompsons thrived on, was already starting to crack. If this story touched you, go ahead and subscribe. Some truths are too important to miss. It was never about genuine authority. It was always about intimidation and controlling perception. And perceptions can be changed. The next day, something unexpected happened. Robert and Sarah Thompson showed up at our door, their smiles forced and clearly rehearsed. Michael, we feel this situation has gotten out of hand, Robert began, his tone dripping with artificial calm. We'd like to propose a resolution, he added, handing me a document titled Mutual Non-Disclosure and Non-Litigation Agreement. Sarah nodded enthusiastically, her voice sugary. We're all neighbors, after all. There's no need for this unpleasantness to continue. I invited them in politely, noting how Sarah's eyes flicked across our living room, clearly searching for something she could later report as a violation. Amy read the document slowly, her expression unreadable, but every now and then her eyebrows lifted at some of the more outrageous clauses. Interesting, she finally said. So, in exchange for you stopping the flood of violation notices, we agree never to question HOA financial decisions or bring any legal claims against the board or its officers. She placed the paper down and looked at them calmly. May I ask what prompted this sudden interest in reconciliation? Robert shifted, clearly uncomfortable. As Sarah said, we're all neighbors. The community thrives when everyone works together in harmony. Harmony under your control, you mean? I said before I could stop myself. Amy shot me a look. She was clearly playing a longer game. Sarah's smile vanished, replaced by a thinly veiled warning. We've been very patient with your adjustment period, Mr. Johnson. Not everyone is suited for this kind of community living. Perhaps if you find our standards too restrictive, Amy cut in smoothly. What my father means is that real harmony requires transparency and fairness, neither of which this agreement provides. She handed the document back. I'm afraid we'll have to decline. Robert's civility cracked just slightly. You're making a serious mistake. There are consequences to defying HOA leadership. As they turned to leave, Amy casually added, Oh, Robert, just so you know, this conversation has been recorded. Threatening homeowners for exercising legal rights could be considered harassment under state law. Their stunned faces said it all as the door closed behind them. I turned to Amy, newly impressed by her quiet, tactical brilliance. So what's our next move? I asked. Her grin was confident, maybe even a little playful. A press conference. And Dad, with your diplomatic background and calm authority, you're going to be the perfect spokesperson. Robert had called an emergency HOA meeting, clearly hoping to fast-track new bylaws that would give him more control and make it easier to oust dissenting residents. The community center was packed, tension in the air so thick you could almost feel it. Robert sat at the front table, flanked by Sarah, David, and Curtis, all of them trying to look confident, but the cracks were showing. And they had good reason to be nervous. Amy's strategy had been executed with near-military precision. Officer Rodriguez, Marcus Reed, and a reporter from the local paper were all in place, seated strategically around the room. Robert opened the meeting with his usual polished performance, but his voice had a tremor as he stressed the importance of community solidarity and warned about new residents causing division. His eyes locked on me as he spoke. I returned his look with a neutral, practiced smile. Years of diplomacy taught me how to hold my expression. When he moved to introduce the first proposed amendment, one that would grant the HOA unrestricted access to any homeowner's property, I stood. "Point of order," I said calmly. He looked irritated but acknowledged me. "Before we vote to expand board authority, I believe the community should be fully informed about how that authority has already been used." Murmurs rippled through the room. I walked to the front and placed a folder on the table. As a concerned resident, I've reviewed the HOA's financial records, documents that, by rights, should be easily accessible to all of us, but haven't been. Robert tried to interrupt, but Jessica quickly seconded my right to speak, using the same bylaws he'd often twisted to silence others. And then, for the next 30 minutes, I did what I had done countless times in tense international rooms. I laid out the facts calmly and clearly. I explained how $150,000 a year from our HOA fees went to a security company owned by Sarah Thompson's brother, employing unlicensed guards, including Mr. Wilson. Yes, the same one who'd pointed a gun at Amy. Curtis fidgeted under the weight of the crowd's growing scrutiny. I moved on. The landscaping contract? Awarded to Robert's college roommate's firm, charging 60% more than market rate for barely any actual work. Jessica handed out packets with everything: emails, invoices, photographs. Robert's face flushed, Sarah began whispering angrily, and David looked physically ill. "Most disturbing of all," I said, my voice firm, "is that over $300,000 collected for infrastructure upgrades over the past 3 years has simply vanished. No traceable work, no accounting. And now you want more power." Curtis moved toward me, his stance clearly aggressive, but Officer Rodriguez stepped in, calm and firm, stopping him with a few quiet words. That's when Robert stood up abruptly, all pretense of charm gone. The firm brought in properly licensed personnel who understood the boundaries of their authority, but the biggest change came from within the community itself. Jessica Miller became the new HOA president, with Linda Peterson as her vice president. One of their first actions was to revise the bylaws, bringing transparency, fair enforcement, and cutting the ridiculous fees that had propped up the old regime's excesses. Neighborhood events transformed. They were no longer social power plays, but spaces where people genuinely came together. People who once barely nodded at each other were now stopping to chat while walking dogs or picking up the mail. One quiet evening, just before Amy was due to leave for her next assignment, she and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Sarah Thompson showed up at her gate. She looked nothing like the woman we once knew. Her designer clothes replaced with jeans, her polished look replaced by something more real and worn. "May I speak with you?" she asked, her voice unsteady. I glanced at Amy, who gave a small nod, and I invited Sarah to sit. She didn't, just stood there awkwardly, struggling to find the words. "I wanted to apologize before I leave for good," she finally said. "I knew some of what Robert was doing. Not everything, but enough. And I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone, that it was just how things worked." Amy studied her for a moment. "Then why be part of it, Sarah? You knew it was wrong." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Because my whole identity was wrapped in being Mrs. Robert Thompson, the Queen of Lakeside Pines. Before him, I was just a receptionist from a small town. But after marrying him, the status, the admiration, the way other women looked at me, I got addicted to it." She looked down at her bare, unpolished hands. "Now I'm 55, starting from scratch, with nothing but alimony and regrets." I felt an unexpected stab of sympathy for her. The need to feel significant. It's something we all understand, and it had led her into something that slowly consumed her. After she left, Amy and I decided, on a whim, to host a barbecue. We invited the neighbors who had stood by us, and even those who were just ready for a fresh start. That night, as twilight softened the sky and conversations flowed across the same lawn that once felt so watched and judged, Jessica pulled me aside. "Your daughter is extraordinary," she said, watching Amy effortlessly talk with a group of residents. "I've learned more about leadership from her in these months than in my entire life. She never wanted control or credit, just fairness. The community's going to miss her. I nodded, that familiar feeling in my chest, a mix of pride and sadness that comes with knowing your child is meant for bigger things, often far from home. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Amy and I sat on the porch steps, sipping bourbon in the hush before morning. I've been thinking about all this, I told her, the drink helping me speak more freely. You could have handled Curtis that first night and walked away. But you didn't. You stayed and changed the whole community. Why? Amy stared into her glass before answering. Growing up, I watched you work, and I learned that real diplomacy isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about transforming it. Curtis pulling a gun on me? That was just a symptom of a sick system. Removing him wouldn't fix anything by itself. She looked out at the quiet neighborhood, porch lights glowing like stars. This wasn't revenge, Dad. It was restoration. Communities like this should feel safe, not fearful. In that moment, I saw something I hadn't fully recognized before. It wasn't just the tactical commander in her responding. It was the builder, the restorer. I've spent most of my life dismantling threats, she said softly. But there's a kind of satisfaction that comes from building something better in its place. The next morning, just before driving her to the airport, we found a pile of thank you cards from neighbors, people we barely knew 3 months ago. As we loaded her luggage, she asked, "You gonna be okay here without me? What if another guard decides to play hero?" I laughed, feeling more at home than I had in years. "I'll be fine. Your old man still knows a few diplomatic tricks." As we drove off, I glanced back at the house, the same one that once symbolized conflict but now felt like a true home, and then beyond it to the community that had finally found its voice. "You know," Amy said as we neared the airport, "there's something I've come to believe in all my years of tactical command. Sometimes you don't need to fire a shot to win a battle. Sometimes understanding your opponent's game and turning it to your advantage is the greatest victory." She smiled, the morning sun lighting up her face. "And sometimes the most peaceful places are the ones that survive the worst storms." Ever since that night, whenever an HOA, here or anywhere, tries to overstep, people remember the story of the FBI commander's daughter and her steady, diplomatic father. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just understand their rights and refuse to be bullied. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all, never point a gun at someone when you don't know who they really are, especially if she's an FBI tactical commander with a mind for strategy and a heart for justice. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us tell more powerful stories that matter. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and never stop seeking the truth.